Welcome to a presentation on the Ohio 7th grade English Language Arts Curriculum Standards, an analysis and critique. Foundations. The Ohio English Language Standards are heavily rooted in the Common Core standards of learning. Establishing these standards is the work of many people over decades. The project was spearheaded by the Council of Chief State School Officers and the National Governors Association. These groups brought together the brightest minds in education and government to establish standards for college and career readiness. The main stated purpose of the standards is to create the next generation of K-12 standards in order to help ensure that all students are college and career ready in literacy no later than the end of high school. As evidenced by the title, the Ohio ELA standards seek to focus on results rather than means. Thus, this curriculum solidly fits into a standard-based model of education. Armstrong lays out the key areas of focus for this type of curriculum: to establish clear statements regarding what students should learn, and to develop reliable and valid assessment systems that can be used to ascertain whether, in fact, the desired learning has occurred. The stated purpose of these standards is clearly articulated time and again throughout the core documents of the Ohio ELA standards. Some of the main philosophies and methodologies behind the standards include that they are research and evidence-based, aligned with college and work expectations, rigorous, and internationally benchmarked. If nothing else, the goals and objectives laid out by the ELA standards have been founded upon a great deal of research and investigation. Justifications are given for each standard based on a slew of research and in a clear, concise manner. For example, for the anchor standard for text complexity, dozens of research reports and data sources are presented to cement the idea that students need to be exposed to an ever-increasing level of complexity through their education to meet the needs of modern universities and workplaces. The following are examples of these research topics. Organization. In this section of the presentation, we'll be looking at the Grade 7 English Language Arts curriculum as a model of the overall application and effectiveness of the Ohio Common Core standards. The standards are laid out in an organized and understandable fashion, mainly based upon a subject area curriculum design. This is understandable given the overall structure of the Common Core standards. The 7th grade ELA standards fit very much into the content standards model laid out by Armstrong, going over procedural standards, declarative standards, and contextual standards. The Ohio 7th grade ELA focuses heavily on contextual standards, though there are a fair amount of the focus on procedural and declarative as well. The standards are broken up into 4 specific areas of focus: reading, which is divided between literature and informational text, writing, speaking and listening, and language. Within each one of these, there are indicators and benchmarks tied to interrelated standards which take on particular focus in that area. The standards are also each tied to college and career readiness anchor standards. These are clearly labeled by number throughout the documents, and there's a difference between the grade level standards and the CCR standards. The CCR standards and grade standards are necessary complements, the former providing broad standards, the latter providing additional specificity. The following are examples of the CCR standards as applied to 7th grade reading. Here are those standards continued. The grade 7 ELA standards look very much like the maps we've looked at throughout the semester. Though they are not broken down by week or month, they are broken down by standard, strand, topic, enduring understandings, recommended assessments, recommended content, each relating back to a college and career readiness anchor standard. If we look at the sequencing within the 7th grade ELA standards, the predominant method used is a part-to-whole sequencing method. Each standard and topic is broken down into smaller segments with formative assessments built to a bigger picture overview of the topic considered. But as the ELA standards are not completely tied to any chronology throughout the school year, there are definitely elements of thematic topic sequencing as well, meaning this would be considered more of a combined pattern sequencing method. Content. While the ELA standards do not give a list of required text or methods, the indicators for each subject give a clearly defined expectation of learning outcomes. It is within these learning outcomes that we can get a view of the certain content expectations. There is an excellent sense of continuity and articulation in the standards, as each grade level band is attached to the broader CCR anchor with slight variances based on grade level. For instance, we'll see variances of complexity expected in the craft and structure standard students are expected to learn in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Notice the differences and the similarities between each grade level. One of the key focuses of the Common Core standards is preparing students for the 21st century, not only for moving on to higher education, but for careers as well. The Partnership for 21st Century Learning details many of the aspects educators and employers expect students to master. Some of those skills include critical thinking and problem solving, communication and collaboration, creativity and innovation, information technology and communication literacy, and global awareness. Analyzing the expectations of the 7th grade ELA standards, these concepts and themes of 21st century learning are returned to again and again. Good examples which evidence this focus can be found in the enduring understandings throughout the standards. The following are some examples. Another one of the key content aspects of the ELA standards is that the teachers are given indicators and benchmarks to shoot for, but the instructional strategies and activities are suggested, not imposed. These suggested strategies and activities do focus heavily on 21st century skills and abilities, all while entrenching the learning outcomes with outside-of-the-box methods. Some of these activities and resource suggestions include board games, newscast scripts, and carousels. These varied activities lend themselves to incorporating both substantive knowledge and syntactic knowledge in a very balanced way. The activities also seek to develop attitudes and appreciations of learning, key when we are projecting out skills for lifetime learners who will succeed in their chosen life paths. Assessment. Anyone that does not agree with standards-based assessment will want nothing to do with Ohio's Common Core English standards. With the Common Core standards, end-of-year testing is paramount to evaluating how a student is learning, as well as comparing schools and districts. Ohio's 7th graders studying ELA are no different. All 7th graders are given an end-of-the-year summative assessment in English and math. The curriculum standards, indicators, and benchmarks are all geared towards students performing well on these tests. These summative exams were produced based on a broad input from stakeholders and experts in the Ohio education community, with a particular focus on the viewpoints of what teachers thought would be necessary in testing. There is flexibility in the assessment methods used during the school year. By emphasizing required achievements, the standards leave room for the teachers, curriculum developers, and states to determine how those goals should be reached. Whether the methods are summative or formative is up to each individual teacher. As with the content, there are recommended activities which can be used for assessment. Many of these suggestions are formative in nature, as the main summative assessment comes at the end of the year. Some examples include writing journals, making graphic organizers, and stump the teacher activities. While there are myriad suggestions for assessments, there are very few, if any, rubrics laid out. These are left to the individual teachers and again allow for a great amount of flexibility. As long as the standards are met at the end of year testing, teachers and schools can determine the models which fit best. This is not so with the mandated summative assessments at the end of the year. Students and teachers are able to view resources such as rubrics, study guides, and practice tests on the Ohio Department of Education's website. These resources lay out clear and concise guidelines for what students and teachers can expect on the tests. Critique. The 7th grade ELA standards adopted by Ohio are at one time extensive and concise. There is a coherence to the standards, especially when comparing grade level bands to each other. Each standard is tied to a CCR standard slightly modified depending on the level of complexity expected, and this is based on developmental levels. This fits into the model laid out by Jean Piaget and meets the core beliefs of those who believe education should be based on educational characteristics of students. These levels of development are as follows. This adherence to development can be seen when looking at the grade level requirements together. There is an identifiable scope, sequence, articulation, and spiraling. Standards, concepts, and learning outcomes are introduced in earlier grade levels and returned to again and again as the student progresses through the grade level, always demanding higher levels of thinking at each step, best exemplified by Bloom's taxonomy. Provided as an example which exemplifies the defined progression through grade levels to higher levels of thinking. Each grade level is similar in the expected outcome, but there is a progression of complexity of thought. The 6th grader is expected to answer a question. The 8th grader is expected to answer a question and generate new avenues of exploration by analyzing and synthesizing multiple sources. One of the key arguments against standards-based education is that schools and teachers will design curricula that are teaching to the test. There is no denying that the curriculum adopted by the Ohio Department of Education falls into that model, and in testing is a key determinant in school success at the end of the year. In one sense, the ELA does a good job of laying out clear learning expectations, which helps teachers identify what could be content and assessment, while taking into account their own unique pressures from content selection from society and the learners in their classrooms. There are definite issues with relying so heavily on standardized tests. As Armstrong lays out, there are several legitimate concerns that educators have with this method of evaluation. Among those concerns are that they only provide a snapshot of a student at one point in time, that because of the types of questions asked, they do not promote higher level thinking. They also do not take into account societal variables which may affect student learning, and in an ever more diverse student population, they lack fairness. In a 21st century model of education, there should be flexibility for individual learners, and while the ELA standards do make a nod to different learning levels by providing helpful links for special needs students, there is really no way that those different factors can be adequately taken into account in standardized testing. Some of these concerns were laid out by Robert Stake in his critique. He argued that standardized tests should be indicators of achievement and mastery. In practice, they indicate aptitude in a one-size-fits-all model of education. A final issue is that while the standards are clear and concise, teachers and schools are given extreme flexibility to use the content assessments they deem fit to meet those objectives. This creates a gray area as to whether certain schools or teachers can meet criteria for the proper selection of educational materials, especially with regards to the significance, authenticity, and whether they match student characteristics. Teachers do want flexibility, but if everything is geared towards scoring well in standardized tests, there needs to be more guidance in selecting appropriate materials from a higher level. The goals are clear, but the means need to be more concrete. In conclusion, the Ohio Standards for English Language Arts in 7th grade provide an excellent framework with clear and concise standards and learning objectives. There's a consistency and articulation of concepts and skills which permeates throughout and has obviously been thoughtfully designed by experts and stakeholders. But with an over-reliance on standardized testing, I feel that there may be better models to launch our education system in a more equitable way and into global competition in the 21st century. Thank you.